So this time I'm going to ask everyone to take out your Chumashim, your Bibles, which you've tucked away so nicely once we finish the chanting of the Haftarah. I'm going to ask everyone to take out your Bibles, please, and open up to page 697. Now, as I mentioned, as I was reciting a prayer for our country, this has been a week where we've sensed a lot of pain, a lot of anger, a lot of hate. We had debates about the constitutional right to gay marriage, and while the debates themselves, I'll leave for the lawyers to judge how civil they were, how well they were done, the surrounding drama of those debates, voices on both sides, articulate such anger and hate towards one another that while things that unfolded within the courtroom were also civil, things that were happening outside the courtroom and some of the voices expressed and some of the opinions articulated were not so civil. And it's ironic that of all the Shabbatot, that we should have a conversation, or that there should be a conversation on a national level as to gay marriage, this particular Torah reading really takes the cake. Because it is in this particular Torah reading where we read the biblical prohibition against homosexuality. However, not just in the events that unfolded in Washington, D.C. and in the Supreme Court did we see a lot of anger and hate and pain, but also in the things that unfolded, the riots that unfolded in Baltimore. We don't know yet entirely what happened to Freddie Gray, though whatever it is, it looks can be at the minimum to be completely irresponsible treatment, at a minimum, of putting someone in a police van without buckling them up properly. But beyond that, beyond whatever may have happened, and hopefully over the next weeks we will learn more, the anger and the pain that one sees that comes out in the riots, the frustration and anger that is expressed towards the police force, and the anger of others towards those people who are rioting and destroying things for which there is absolutely no excuse, all give a sense that we are a country that is dealing with a lot of pain. And so what I'd like to ask everyone to do today is I'd like you to look on page 697. 697, verse 18. And I want you to pair up with people around you. And I want you to read that verse to one another, because that verse, among other things, says, V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And I want you to share with a person who is next to you, who's behind you, who's in front of you, one act of love that you did for another human being this week. So have a quick read of the verse, and then start talking amongst yourselves. What did you do that was loving for someone this week? Go ahead, go to it. You got 15 more seconds. So, how easy was it to find one act of kindness that you did for another person? Pretty straightforward? Yeah. I mean, when we review our week, it's not that hard to find that one act. And yet, it's not so easy to do. It's not so easy to love our neighbor as ourselves. When we look at Jewish tradition teaches us that this commandment, V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, is the klal gadol, is the central principle of Torah according to Rabbi Akiva. And yet, while we can all take a moment and think of an act of love, an act of kindness that we have done for another person, fulfilling this commandment is very difficult to do. In part because when we think of loving another person, we think that God, here the Torah is trying to command what? It's trying to command our emotions. And can you actually just say to someone, love someone, and have them do it? Not at all. In fact, think of it this way. What is the least helpful statement you can make when someone, for example, is really angry? What's the least useful thing? Calm down. Right? And we've all done it. Oh, you're so angry? Don't be angry. What do you think that really does for the person? Right? Right. If anything, telling someone who's really angry to not be angry only makes them angrier. Right? And we're so funny about these things. We don't give proper credence to how powerful our emotions are, such that we think if we just simply tell someone what it is they should feel, that all of a sudden they will feel it. And in fact, the Torah seems to be making the same mistake here. V'yahavta l're'echa kamocha. Sure, we can all take a few minutes and think of something that we've done, right? But when we consider that the Torah is trying to command us to love someone as ourselves, realize that is such a tall order. However, what's funny is in 2 verses, one right after the other, the Torah not only makes this mistake once, but it actually makes the mistake twice. Right? If we look at the verses surrounding the V'yahavta l're'echa kamocha, and here I ask you to look at verse 17, right? It says, "You shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. Reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. I am the Lord." So not only is the Torah here giving us the very tall order of saying to love, but what else is it doing? What other emotion does it command? It says, don't hate. Thanks. That's really useful. That's terribly helpful for me. So, we can either just move on from these verses in the Torah, appreciate that they set a high ideal, and that it's one that many of us will fail to meet, and be done with it. However, I'd like to suggest the following. I would like to suggest that this commandment, you shall not hate your brother or your kinsman within your heart, and the commandment, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, are actually connected in this reading. In fact, not only are they connected, but I will suggest that the Torah understands exactly how hard it is for us to control our emotions. That the Torah understands exactly what a difficult standard it's setting when it says, and you shall love, and that within these verses, the Torah tells us exactly how we can achieve this mitzvah. So let us begin. As I said, this little section containing, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself, starts really with, and you shall not hate your neighbor in your heart. What the Torah understands very clearly is that if we are to move people towards loving one another, the first thing we have to get people to stop doing is they have to stop hating. But what does it mean to hate in one's heart? What do you think that's about? This is the interactive part of the Darvar Torah. And as I always say, if you interact, we get to the Kiddush quicker.
The problems we're having in the Middle East, where you have certain terrorists who have actual hatred for the pure sake of hatred.
Okay, so we have situations where people like terrorists seem to hate for the pure, for the what is it you said, the pure
Hatred of hatred.
Pure hatred of the other. Yes.
Maybe it means that you hate in your heart regardless of what's happening.
Okay, so it's either pure hatred or hatred in your heart regardless of what is happening. Any other thoughts as to what it is to hate someone in your heart? I'll suggest the following. Oh, yes. Got to let the bar mitzvah father say something.
Not being able to forgive.
Not being able to forgive. But what is it that makes it so hard to forgive? I'll suggest this. When the Torah says, bil vavecha, that you shall not hate in your heart, when someone hurts you, when someone really hurts you, where does the conversation take place? Right? When you think about what they've done, right, that takes place in your heart. That takes place within you. And when you think about what they've done, when you reflect, when you ruminate, and when you review once again, over and over, all the things that person did to hurt you, how does that make you feel? Worse. Worse. one of the things that we've learned over time, and one of the things that we've relearned because the Torah teaches it right here, is that when someone does something to hurt you, to stew and to mull and to ruminate on it, and to kind of look at it at every single angle, doesn't actually make the pain go away. We think if we can just relive it enough that we get used to it, we will be able to manage the pain, but the opposite is in fact often the truth. That when we keep focusing on what another did to us, it doesn't make our hatred for them less, it just continually stokes it. And so we get angrier, and we hold on to that hatred. So that's why the Torah says not just to not hate, but don't hate in your heart. Okay, nice. How do you do that, though? How do you get past hating in your heart? The Torah provides the answer. It says, reprove your kinsman, incur no guilt because of him. Okay, so what does it mean to reprove someone? Huh? What does it mean? To tell them off. Okay, now, Jan, if you just tell someone off, how is that gonna go? Right. Jan's absolutely right, which is to reprove someone is to tell them off, but you've got to do it in a way that they themselves can hear it. Hence the Torah says, reprove the other, but incur no guilt because of them. Right? In other words, both in the act of reproving, the Torah suggests that when we articulate our pain, not to ourselves and not in our own heads, but when we actually articulate our pain to the one who hurt us, is the first step towards being able to get rid of it, to get past it. And if we do so appropriately, we incur no guilt because of him. Now, why is it that most people don't actually talk to the person who hurt them and tell them? Right? Here's the Torah's advice. You want to get past hating someone in your heart? Someone hurts you, you go talk to them. But that's not what we do. We keep it in our hearts. We keep it in our heads. We share it. By the way, sharing with like-minded people is just about as good as keeping it in your heart and head. Right? Because when you share it with like-minded people, let's say who are also hurt by the other, right? What does that just do? Right, it makes it worse. It likes make it exponentially worse, right? Because then you're just feeding off of each other's anger, right? So why don't we, though, go and talk to the person who wronged? Yeah. Right, great point. The willingness to hold the grudge is, 10 times easier, you said? Than the willingness to forgive. It's true. It is so much easier to hold on to my pain than to let it go. In part because when I hold on to my pain, what do I feel? Right? And don't say pain. Well, you'll get to vengeance. Validated. Right? You know what happens when you think someone has done something wrong? If they've done something wrong, what does that mean about your status? It means you are right. And what did I say a couple of weeks ago? The feeling we love most in this world is being right. So we'll hold on to our pain. We'll hold on to our hatred. Not only that, but confronting the other means that even while they've hurt me, I also have to acknowledge that they are a human being. And when someone has hurt me, that is the hardest thing to do. When someone has caused me pain, to understand that they too have a story, they have a background, their actions came out of a context, requires me to stretch my soul in a way that is difficult. But the Torah is not done there. Right? You want to move past hatred in your heart, the first thing you have to do is you have to be able to talk to the person. If you're not willing to talk to the person who hurt you, then you are merely going to continue being in pain. But the Torah continues and it says, also, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge. What is the difference between taking vengeance and bearing a grudge is actually explained here very beautifully. Rashi that great medieval commentator who lived from 1040 to 1105, Rashi notes that to take vengeance means when someone comes to you and say, will you lend me such and such an object? You take vengeance on them. Since they didn't lend it to you when you ask, you take vengeance on them by saying, I won't. That's taking vengeance. And to bear a grudge is when that person comes to you and say, will you lend me? Right? You say, I will lend it to you, even though you didn't lend me yours. Right? And the Torah says you can neither take vengeance nor bear a grudge. Why can't you take vengeance? What will taking vengeance achieve? Right. If you take vengeance upon someone from what they've done to you, right, in your own mind, you're thinking, but I'm right. So this is okay to do. But in their mind, guess what? You're wrong. Because while you can so clearly see the wrong of the other person, strangely enough, they can't see they're wrong. And until you reprove them, until you bring it up, they're not going to see they're wrong. And so when we act in vengeance, where we think we are simply responding to the wrong done to us, from their perspective, we're initiating the fight. So vengeance doesn't help. And bearing a grudge is no good either. Bearing a grudge is no good. Because it means even while I'm doing right, my heart is in the wrong place. And it's only when my actions and my heart align that I can begin fulfilling the commandment, v'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, to love one's neighbor as oneself. That's why these verses, I'll suggest, are lined up one after the other. You shall not hate your neighbor in your heart, because with that, there can be no love of the other. You should reprove them. You articulate your pain to the other so you can move past it. And once you move past it, let it go. No acts of vengeance, no bearing a grudge. These are the necessary, essential steps for us to take if we are to fulfill the greatest principle in the Torah, its most central commandment of loving the other person as ourselves. I will share 2 points by way of concluding. One is, as I began, our country is in a world of hurt. And when we hold on to our anger and our hurt and our pain, we add to the hurt in our country. Even though we're not necessarily directly involved by what's happening in Washington and Baltimore, we add to all of that pain when we simply refuse to address our own hatred and start here and now in our own homes, in our own communities, in our own congregations, in our own city, making this a more loving place. The other thing I would point out is, notice how it doesn't say, if someone hurts you so that you hate them. Why doesn't it say, if someone does you wrong? Because someone is going to do you wrong today. It's not an if, it's simply a when. And the reason I say that is not because I think people are bad, not that I think people are deliberately malicious or evil. I say that because people are people, human. And what do we say about being human? If I look at my dog and I say, to run is to be a dog. To be antisocial is to be a cat. To err is human. You notice we don't say that about any other animals, but we say that about being human because we understand that human beings and human nature is fundamentally flawed. It's just part of who we are. Inevitably, someone is going to hurt you today. Someone will offend you. Someone will cross a line. And you and I have a choice as to how we're going to respond. Are we going to let the hatred and pain dwell within our hearts? Or are we going to try to move past it so that we can be the kind of Jews that the Torah envisions, commands, and that our world requires. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.